You are listening to Draw 4 Podcast. Good tidings and thanks for joining us. My name is Joseph Dunlap, executive producer of Draw 4 Podcast and featured writer on ManaLink.com.
And I'm Brenda. I play a lot of competitive limited.
I'm Jared DeMartini, owner of The Gathering Place in Abilene and San Angelo, Texas, and limited aficionado.
We have two guests that are calling in from somewhere across the ocean. What are your names? Who are you guys?
I'm Gary Wilkinson. We're part of BAFDraft out of Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan, and
I'm Matt Zerby. I'm also part of BAFDraft.
What a coincidence, guys. It's like you're in the same room or something.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah, it's like a little mini room studio.
Let's do a fake high five. Oh, for real.
Was that really fake?
No, it was real.
That was real.
It was real. Okay. Well, I was going to ask you what BAFDraft is, but that just so happens to be the topic for our upkeep. So let's move into the upkeep, shall we? What is BAFDraft and where are you guys?
Well, BAFDraft is a community of Magic players in Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan. We're made up of contractors and military members out here in the war zone, and I guess I tout us as like the largest or only military deployed Magic the Gathering organized group that has their own we have our own website, we have our own podcast. We run about 3 events a week?
Yeah,
about three events a week.
Yep.
So we do everything from Commander to Draft to Constructed. We do Cube. We pretty much we do pre-release events, thanks to Jared. And we do all kinds of stuff out here. We've been running since, I think, the actual organization that we call now BAFDraft has been running coordinated since about 2010.
Yeah, and we've been running a podcast since November of last year. 2005, or 2015.
2005, right. So it goes back to even before you were out there.
I believe we have it on the record that the military has a time machine.
Yeah. Shouldn't leak that. We have to edit this podcast.
So one thing they mentioned is, Jared, you are sort of their sponsor as far as getting them product for their events.
All right, the Gathering Place has been very fortunate to have some of our military members at the Air Force bases near us deploy over, and we've had a good relationship with BAFDraft. I've come on and done a couple of set review podcasts, and we have the privilege of getting to help them get their pre-release product and products that they need to keep on gaming and have a little bit of home way over in the sandbox.
Yeah, and we've truly been blessed by Jared and the Gathering Place.
Yep. No, we really have. I mean, like, it's exciting because, matter of fact, we're doing an Eldritch Moon pre-release coming up, I guess, in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Yep.
Once we get our pre-release product in, and it's a big event. Like, matter of fact, the USO here is they're doing food.
Prizes.
Yeah, prizes. They bought some prize support. I mean, it's going to be awesome. So we did it last time. We had, 26 people show up?
Yep.
So I'm hoping to get about the same turnout and just make it a little more grand and advertise who we are and get some more players in our very weird rotating metagame that we have here.
Yes.
Yeah, we talked earlier about that, and I was going to ask, is 26 players indicative of your player base, or do people come in from out of, quote, town?
When we did when we had 26 players, it literally was some people just happened. Keep in mind, we have 3 different events every week. So you have some people that come religiously to our Commander. You have some people that come religiously to our drafts. The base is very big, and I can't get into specifics, but sometimes it's harder for some people to get in some location than another.
But just like a normal pre-release would be in the States, it brings out all the players to one unified event.
Yeah.
Because everybody wants to try the new product. Everyone wants to see a new thing. So, a pre-release for us is almost like what it's like in the States.
Yeah.
I'd say at 36 players, that's probably more than a lot of stores get. So not bad at all.
Our numbers fluctuate. I mean, we've gone anywhere from
3 people.
Yeah, three people to an event sometimes. To I think the most
we
we've
maxed
had
out
is
at 20, 19 or 20. I don't know. We were competing with the USO poker for a while.
Yeah, no, we
maxed out over 20 at some point.
We had 5 tables filled out.
Yeah, on drafts, because we were that was during Modern Masters and whatever was out during Modern Masters. Modern Masters 2015, by the way. Yeah. And then whatever the other set was out at the time, I can't remember. So.
All right, so let's go back to 2015, when your podcast started. Walk us through the story of how your podcast started. What was the inspiration? Who got the wheels rolling, and how many hosts do you have?
Scott Hibbler.
Well, we just our last actual podcast we tried to bring on Scott Hibbler and our internet was just truly terrible. But he was the one who truly inspired us. You know, he was talking about a bunch of podcasts and he said, "Why don't you guys do it?" And Gary over here, he listens to a lot of a plethora of non-Magic podcasts, and he's like, "You know what? Screw it. I'm just gonna go get my buy some equipment."
I went on vacation and I bought basically I went out and said, I got myself $300 budget. Let me get some microphones and an interface. I got to Focusrite, and then I went from there. It went on like I'm way into it now. We got a mixer, the whole deal. That's why you're hearing both of us at the same time. We're mixing in on one feed, so.
Yeah, and so it was truly it was a community event too that inspired us to actually start doing it because people would come to us and ask us questions, and it was simple things like how does Death Touch work or how does Trample work and little tiny simple mechanics, and we're like, we wish there was something for our community to answer questions for newer players because you have like limited resources and a bunch of the other big podcasts, but they don't talk about the super basics of Magic. So that's where we tried to start, is talking about brand new players.
And basically our podcast just highlights the simple gaming community that we have here in Bagram is pretty much all it is. And every once in a while, if you've listened to our podcast, we get a soldier, airman, contractor. We'll get somebody in our community. We try to encourage them to come on the podcast. We get that third microphone for that. So
it's truly a feat how you guys do it because, you guys have arguably a tough job under non-ideal conditions where sometimes the internet cuts in and out and you're still able to, persevere through it and put the product out. So it's definitely commendable.
Yeah. For example, today we are an hour late in this recording because when we came back to the studio, the power was out in the whole compound.
Literally, we walked into the room. We walked into my door to go to my room because we live in sea container. I live in a sea container, and then the power just. I was like, wow, the power's out. And he looked at the last IM I got on Facebook, and he was like, dude, that literally went out when you opened the door. It had to have, because I just got that feed in when the door opened. I'm like, hey, it happens. So.
All right, so let's talk about, you already brought up something I was going to ask about, which was your demographic. You want to appeal to beginning players. What is the overall kind of snapshot of your ideal audience member for your podcast? Because I'm sure we've got some of them listening right now.
Our ideal audience member are just military members who are deployed, regardless of how long you've been playing, if you're new to it, really well at it. We pretty much have the mix. I don't know what mixes are back in the States, but based on the handful of stores that I've played, when I was in the military and when I was in the States, we have the 2 or 3 guys who are the veterans or the really good guys that, seem to draft well, seem to be the experts at it. And then you got the handful of intermediates, and then you got the new guys. So same thing here.
Well, our demographic is also the person who has been deployed or the person who is sat there, and then they can listen to our podcast and go, oh my word, these guys are having the same internet problems I used to have.
Reminiscing.
And chuckle to themselves like, oh, thank goodness I'm not up there.
Yeah, it is a very unique, I guess, clique or whatever we're in. Only so many people can relate, but other people can listen to it too and enjoy it and appreciate it. So.
Well, you mentioned beginning players, so I'm sure there is an appeal to even non-military who just want to hear how these guys overseas are having fun with their game and different levels of expertise. You mentioned that you guys occasionally will play Tier 1, but that you have all types when you have your tournaments.
Yeah, back in this was right before we started the podcast, we actually used to run a tier system of prize support. Mm-hmm. We had Tier 1 and Tier 2. So to keep the newer players feeling like they were doing well, we had end of the month prizes for points accumulation based on how they won. And it worked out well until we lost, you get rotations a lot. So then we lost that number of people, and then it kind of went out. And purposely, even in our personal games one-on-one, we'll cater to newer players and, stop, no, don't do this. You should probably make this move instead. And we do that kind of stuff.
Some of our players only start playing Magic on a deployment. So we've had players that have only played for a week when they come out to, draft events. We had one guy who didn't know how draft works, so he opened a pack, passed a card, then opened the next pack and passed a card, then opened the third pack and passed a card. And
none of us caught it until about
it was until he opened the third pack and passed it that we realized what was happening.
Did you say, quite literally, take one, pass it down? Because I remember being a smart aleck in elementary school when people said that.
Well, I tell you what, after that event, we were very over the top particular about how we did stuff, and even brought up that scenario. So.
Yeah, it was a learning experience for us because we never even thought that way, and to him what his understanding of draft was, open a pack, pass it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that you're getting a pack, and it wasn't that always. We've had players who didn't take a card, or we've had players who took 2 or 3 cards from a pack. So we've had people who just don't know what the rules are. And so, I like to pride ourselves on teaching people.
Yeah, you're going to open 1 pack at a time. You're going to pass it to the left. You have to pick 1 card only, and, that kind of stuff. In a very polite way.
Of course. As we head out of the upkeep, I'm going to ask a unique question that you may have never heard in an interview before. Let's say I am listening to this episode. I am a regular Draw 4 listener. I'm curious about BAFDraft, but I'm not sure where to start. What episode of BAFDraft should I go listen to, and where can I find it?
Oh, that's a weird one. First off, you can go to BAFDraft.com, and you're linked into pretty much everything we have. And
every one of our episodes is on the website right now.
Yes. As far as episodes to listen to, I didn't think we really kind of got formatted into what we're doing until probably episode 8 or so. Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
what was the episode
8,
what was the episode that I first came on? That's got to definitely be up in the top.
Oh my, yeah, like
in
top,
all modesty.
5. Jeez, man, you asked me now. You put me on the spot here. I want to say it had to have been episode 20. We had the first 2-parter that got deleted. We'd not done too good after episode 20. How about that?
Well, the problem is that we've had technical glitches, and so some of the podcasts that we recorded get broken up into 2 parts. We've lost second parts. The podcast that we currently have is not our current podcast because of the delay that we have in producing and production. So our numbers are kind of weird.
But
Thanks
I would
for asking a tough question.
Yeah, I would say episode 8. But if you go on a BAFDraft, because we do articles on there as well. But if you go into podcast and articles tab on there, it'll pull up all that. Also, if you go to SoundCloud, which is like where I pretty much put all my content as far as podcast goes, you can go there and search it as well. But we have all those links, on our website.
Okay, so BAFDraft.com. We're going to move on to the next segment. This week's Mana League Article of the Week. This is the segment, if you're new here, where we go and look over an article that's notable on ManaLeague.com. This article is From the Kitchen Table to Your First FNM, What to Expect from Judges and Other Players by Morgan McGowan. Morgan is a new writer for Mana League, and his first article is targeted at starting and casual Magic players nervous about attending their first Friday Night Magic. After sharing his own experiences attending FNM for the first time, Morgan gives 5 tips for anyone wanting to make the leap of faith. 1. Don't be afraid to ask questions. 2. Don't be afraid to call a judge. 3. Listen and learn. 4. Don't worry if you do badly. The only way is up. And 5. Just be yourself and have fun. What was it like for your first FNM, Matt and Gary?
Friday Night Magic?
Yeah.
I don't even know if I've ever done one.
So I've done a few Friday Night Magics. Mostly it was back during first Innistrad Standard. And it was being out here in BAFDraft, it felt normal. Our community that we have here, we try and push for a casual / casual competitive sort of feel. So I felt comfortable going to my first one, but that's only because of being out here at BAFDraft.
I've been to Jacksonville, North Carolina, down at the Marine base there. I think that was my first official event I went to because I played way before there was FNM, but I actually was very competitive there, and I got 3rd place in that tournament, but I felt very intimidated, like, wow, these guys are so aggressive. So I keep that in mind when we're here, of course. We try to foster a happy environment, even though we still are competitive sometimes.
Brenda, how was your first FNM? Do you remember it?
I don't actually remember it, which is a little sad, I think. I think it means I've been playing too long. I don't know. I do remember, the general impression the first few times I was at FNM of just being really overwhelmed by all the people with their trade binders out. They seemed so impressive, these foil cards, and just being really overwhelmed with everything. But I was lucky to kind of meet some great people at the very beginning that kind of showed me the way and made an easy intro into the game. I can definitely remember it being a little scary, though, so it's great to have an article that shows people kind of that it's okay to be your first. You should just take the jump and go for it.
It was definitely a good read, and I like that recently on Mana League we've had a lot of articles directed towards those who maybe want to make that transition to F&M or make that transition to their first Grand Prix. We had one about anxiety in the context of your first Grand Prix. We've had one about mental illness in the context of trying to just get into the game. So this is great to have, make the leap of faith. Let's just go to your first F&M. My first F&M was actually a Morningtide pre-release draft, which was interesting. Jared, I was going to ask about F&M, but I wanted to ask specifically, how has F&M for your store changed since, say, your first few months up to this point?
Well, we've learned that there are different divisions sometimes that arise within the store where you have more established players and new players. And one of the big keys and important things we try to do is we try to make the F&M experience welcoming. While I remember my first F&M, I couldn't even play because I just brought these are all my cards, and that did not qualify me as a deck, so I had to play a draft, which was still fun, and I haven't looked back. But there are things that stores, I think, can do and that communities can do to make things more welcoming, such as like posting names and having assigned table numbers. So if you are new, you don't have to just shout around, "Hey, where's Joe at?" And just stand there awkwardly because you don't know anybody's name. People will move seats to go where they need to. There's always open seats. There's not just people sprawled out with all their stuff and you have to go stand somewhere. So I think that's an important thing, is to create a welcoming atmosphere where people who walk in off the street can figure out what's going on, and making sure that there's a lot more staff interaction with new players, and you visit with them and listen to them and talk to them, make them feel welcome. A lot of people go to F&Ms to play the game, but there's more going on at an F&M now than perhaps maybe what we had first seen or first identified at our early stages, where sometimes people go just because they want to hang out and they're having a good time, and that's what they look for in their F&M. So F&Ms definitely need to be a place where no matter what you're looking for, whether it's a high level of competition, a learning experience, or just friendship, that those things are available. It's incumbent upon I feel the store, but also the community. If your store isn't doing those type of things, then the community should take it upon themselves to make sure that people feel welcome and that they meet new people. And I think that our communities have done a really good job carrying that torch.
I have to agree. My first F&M or even store experience was greatly influenced by the people I met when I first walked into the building. And it wasn't an F&M, it was just a Tuesday night draft. I did not know a single person in the building, and I am naturally very, very shy. I'm not the person to go up and talk to people. And I remember standing there being just kind of overwhelmed by people playing, and another woman actually coming up to me and introducing herself and saying, "We don't have a lot of ladies around here. Come, I'll show you around." And just being very introducing and helping me meet a lot of people. And the store I played at runs a great F&M. They do, like you said, they have the seat numbers up there. The judge gives the intro. This may be your first time or you've played here 100 times, but here are the basic rules. If you have any questions, let me know. And I think that's important as a community that we kind of foster as we bring people in, especially those that we've never seen before, to not scare them away.
All right, so that is the article of the week on Mana Leak. If you are a new player wanting to make that plunge and you think that F&M is a little bit scary, you want to know what to expect, or if you're an experienced player or a judge or a tournament organizer and you're wanting to make things more friendly and inviting for the players, it might be good to go see this perspective from Morgan. Now we move on to the community topic, which is Eldritch Moon Limited Set Review. So if you're listening to this, chances are you either just went to the pre-release or you're listening to this to prepare for the pre-release, because we are the source. So now before Jared does his legendary number crunch like he did last set, we're going to give our overall impressions of the set just on a limited basis. So I'll get to start. We'll go through the order of introduction. I looked over the cards. I've been very, very busy over the past month, but I did look over the cards, and I had a few impressions as far as just draft and seal goes. I noticed that this is sort of a bomb set. That's one thing I noticed. But I noticed there's a lot of bombs in this set designed to win drafts and win sealed games. I noticed that there are a lot of opportunities to set yourself up to get blown out, as well as a lot of opportunities to blow other people out. A lot of the mechanics are designed so you can get ahead in the game just by paying extra mana or sacrificing extra creatures. A lot to get out of your investments. For example, a lot of synergy with Emerge cards where you can just pay a little bit extra, get a little bit extra out of it. I've noticed there is still some removal, but I would say SOI is probably heavier in removal. Jared, you can tell me if I'm wrong on that as far as premium removal goes, but what I do notice is that a lot of the cards in this set are begging to get taken out by the premium removal from both sets. There's way too much removal for some of these cards. As far as strategies go, I don't feel like there's any archetypes being set up that we didn't already have, except I think Emerge. But still kind of looks like Sealed's going to be based off of, did I get my bomb? Did I get my removal? If yes, I win. If no, then I lose. But then draft is going to be a little bit crazier than it was with SOI. That's the overall impression I have, which is everyone's drafting towards their strategies. They might be getting the same colors, they might not, but it doesn't really matter because the strategies don't really overlap that much. That's kind of my impression. Brenda, what was your take on it?
I've only had a day here since I was on vacation all last week to really dive into the full spoiler. But from what I've kind of looked at, I definitely think, just like we saw with SOI, there's going to be a big difference between drafting and sealed. They're two completely different conversations, even talking about card power level. I think you need to really evaluate them on that level, especially because we do see the continuation of, the madness, the discard effects. I think we see a lot more madness enablers now in this set that will really make some cards and shadows more powerful. I think, at least in my experience with the limited set from Shadows, that green, white, and black were by far the most powerful colors, particularly green and white. And I think, especially with white, has just gotten better. I kind of disagree in that I think green and white aren't even necessarily bomb-driven. I think with this new set coming in, even more so, it's just they're very powerful, and just getting a good set of uncommons and commons may be able to overwhelm even a good bomb. That's not the same, I think, for some of the other colors necessarily. I'll be really interested to see how the difference with the draft, having the 2 packs of this set, which is the smaller set, see how that impacts things. But I think there are also some cards here that are going to be the rares that you're going to open and then just be like super depressed, because while they're durable and cute and could be built for something fun and constructed, like Harmless Offering, you're never going to really want to play it in limited. So I'm a little hesitant on some of... You could just get a terrible rare pool and be very sad, but I think if you get the good commons and uncommons, you'll be fine. So I'm excited to see what it brings.
I'll crunch some numbers later, but for initial impressions, I always like to try to get a pulse on the format to see if it's going to be a faster-based format or a slower-based format. This one looks like it's going to be a little bit slower, especially with the meld mechanic. Trying to set something like that up takes time. Getting extra mana for Emerge takes time. Getting creatures down that you can sacrifice to try to take advantage of or leverage the Emerge mechanic takes time. So I think that this particular format is going to lend itself to be a little bit slower, and I think that there's going to be a big division between, I guess what I would say, kind of casual play or semi-competitive play versus competitive play. So I think that there's going to be a big difference in what games look like at those levels and for Grand Prix trials and PPTQs and things like that, which I'm going to get a chance to play in one on the 23rd at another owner friend has invited me over to come into his event and have a chance to get to play, and I'm going to take him up on it. I think that one of the big keys to a more competitive format is going to be really understanding game tempo, which is a more advanced concept, knowing when to pressure attack, when to leverage your removal, when you can sacrifice your creature, and how to really take advantage of your 2-for-1s, which I'll come back to and explain where I find those at in the set. I think that that's going to be what's really going to get you ahead. Because I do agree with Brenda that you can get kind of a meh rare pool and it's just not very good. But I think that understanding how the game flows, you can utilize the components that you put into your deck to leverage a better scenario where you can just get up on cards, so to speak. And usually the more cards you have, the more resources you have, the more games you win. So I think that looking for game tempo and understanding that super fast aggro strategies may not be as present, although there are some strategies, there are some cards that really lend to aggro. Being able to identify game tempo in a game is going to be a huge concept for especially sealed, but also in draft.
All right, Matt and Gary, what are you going to be doing when you draft and sealed this set?
I'm going to let Matt take the first deal, and then I'll put my 2 cents in, because I have a whole different approach than Matt does on reviewing and drafting and prepping for anything like this. I like to live in the moment. He likes to prep.
So there's 2 things that I really noticed out of this set, and that's when a set comes out, people talk about the Prince versus the Pauper. Like, do you need rares and mythics to make your deck, or can commons and uncommons get there? And I think Shadows of Innistrad showed us that, it was more of a Pauper set. The commons and uncommons were the powerhouse. The rares were good, but they weren't needed. I think this is going to continue that. There's a lot of commons and uncommons that I am super excited for. The rares are, okay. Some of them are even way worse than the commons and uncommons. So that's what I noticed. The other thing I noticed is that I think this set is going to be hugely focused on 2/3s and 3/2s. The tokens that you make, the horror tokens that you're going to make, are all going to be 3/2s. So there's a lot of creatures that just make 3/2s all over the place. And so 3/2s make 2/3s worse, but 3/2s are worse because there's a bunch of 2/3s. So I think it's going to be that dynamic between those 2 stats for creatures. That's my take.
And my take is big furry monsters are a real deal now. So you get the 2 pieces coming together. Pokemon beat us to the punch, but we're still going to live that dream.
Enjoy it while it's there. If for those of you who haven't ever played with Big Furry Monster, enjoy it while it's here.
All right, Jared, I think it's time for the number crunch.
Yeah, we'll do it. I think that Matt's observation of the 3/2s is particularly interesting, and I think that will play out. Usually I map out the power and toughness and try to average it out, but there were a lot of varying power and toughness things that skew it dramatically. So instead of looking at traditional power and toughness, I've tried instead to modify my approach to kind of look at where the removal lies, but where your good 2-for-1s are, and then where some of your emerge ideas could be, and where you can maybe get ahead in the mid game. I encourage everybody listening, go ahead and pull up your spoiler, because I'll be referencing some cards from it. I'll read them, but I'll read them fast so you get a chance to go back and look. Because I think this format's going to be a little bit slower, I think a card like Faithbender Paladin, which is 4 and a white for a 3/4 human common knight with lifelink, I think that card's actually going to be serviceable. I think you're going to get the 5 mana, I think the lifelink's going to be nice, and I think that 4 toughness is going to block really well. And that card, a 3/4 lifelink for 5 may not be played in some formats, like in battle, that you don't want to be playing that. You could do better than that. But here I think that it could actually be okay and hold the ground. So let's look at removal, and everybody feel free to chime in if you see a piece of removal that you like. I like to separate the removal out by color to see just immediately where the removal is. A note for those who haven't listened to one of my set reviews, I don't evaluate or look at rares or mythics. I actually don't read them at all. I encourage people especially who are being more competitive, to go ahead and read the rares and the mythics. I don't, just because I like that little bit of fun and mystery at my pre-release. I enjoy being surprised by what's there, because you can't budget to beat rares and mythics in your deck construction and gameplay in game 1, because there's so many and there's so few that you encounter all at the same time that you worry more about what numbers you see more often, the commons and uncommons. So removal by color for commons and uncommons. White has 4 pieces of removal, blue has 3, black has 5, red has 5, green has 3, and multicolor has 1 good one. Ride Down is back, and if you've never got a chance to beat somebody with Ride Down, feels real good. There are bad pieces of removal, and while black has 5 pieces of removal, 2 of them I feel aren't very good. So let's look at a piece of black removal that is good and a piece of black removal that is not good. So Murder is back. Murder is a spell that we've seen in the past. It is 1 black instant, destroy target creature. Get you there. Boom. It's gone. By comparison, another piece of black removal, which is Ruthless Disposal, is 4 and a black for a sorcery. As an additional cost, you have to discard a card and sacrifice a creature. And then 2 target creatures get -13/-13 until end of turn. Very flavorful, but I don't feel very good. While you may get to 5 mana, you have to play this card, discard another card, and sacrifice a creature to ostensibly kill 2 things. So you are 3 for 2ing yourself. And since the additional costs are discard a card and sack a creature, feels real bad if this gets countered. So by comparison, while Ruthless Disposal is a piece of removal, Murder, I think, is just much more where you want to be. Typically, in the past, removal is removal. And we just, sometimes we begrudgingly, in Scars of Mirrodin, played our turn to slag or whatever. But I think a lot of us realized and recognized, if you played enough Shadows, and for those of you who've drafted can vouch to this, Throttle and was it reduced to ash at 5 mana sorceries just weren't good. Like, they were almost unplayable. I mean, did you guys see yourself playing a lot of 5 mana removal spells?
Not if I can help it.
Where in the past, 5 mana would be okay.
I was going to point out that when you have a removal spell that's so specific in its wording, discard a card, sacrifice a creature, and then give -13/13, then it starts to go into synergy territory when it gets that specific. So while it's bad on the whole, it's not entirely bad, because you could put it in a deck where you benefit from sacrificing the creature and where you benefit from discarding the card, either for Delirium or Madness or both. So you could play that, discarding Murderous Compulsion, for example, and now you're killing 3 creatures instead of just 2, and then you sacrifice the creature that maybe has a effect when it dies. So really, instead of a 3 for 2, it's kind of a 2 for 4 or something like that. I don't know the exact math on that, but it's definitely something to look at if you find yourself in a situation where you would benefit from doing those very, very specific things.
To add to that point, with Emerge being a giant mechanic, I think there's going to be a lot of time when people are just spinning their wheels. Nothing's happening. So, giving an Emerged creature, it just, pops out, look at me, I'm big, giant, scary, and then now I'm -13. They, 1 for 1 themselves, and now you're gonna 3 for 2 them. I think you can make it up with that.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things about Emerge, which we'll get to in a moment, is understanding the game flow and where you're at in the game is really going to be dependent on how you emerge things, because sacrificing a creature to play something, if you're not getting a lot of upside, which most of the Emerge do have ETB upsides, you don't want to be down in tempo to finally set the state up and then them just cast one of their removal spells, of which there's some pretty decent ones in here at all of the colors that I think have value that can be utilized.
Jared, can I ask you a question about one of the pieces of removal? I wanted your take on it.
Certainly.
It's Choking Restraints. It's for 2 and a white. It's an enchantment aura. It says enchant creature. Enchanted creature can't attack or block. You can pay 3 white, sacrifice Choking Restraints, and exile enchanted creature. This card reminds me a lot of Pacifism at 1 more mana. The creature can't attack or block. But it has that crazy little exile a creature clause for 5 more mana. Have you seen what this is being used for? What not only do you not want to attack and block early, but later on you'd want to exile?
Well, those are going to be obviously creatures that sit around on the board and have a lot of work. Predominantly, your Choking Restraints on face, you play it as pacifism. But here's why that last little bit is good. Twofold. One, if you have some ability that sits on the field and ticks over time and just keeps churning out value, like the green werewolf from Shadows that when it flips, your creatures cost less. Or lets them pay 2 and a green and draw creature cards off the top. You want to get that off the field. You just want that gone. So would you play 3 white, exile a creature? Probably not. But having the versatility of getting a discount plan, so to speak, where you pay 3 mana to stop it from hurting you and blocking, and then 5 mana if you really need to get it off the board, has some versatility. Choking Restraints can help your Delirium count by when you pop it, it goes to your graveyard. And you can exile a creature, so if you think that your opponent is trying to set up an Emerge scenario, you can take away one of their Emerge targets. Because the total best play for you is if your opponent slaps this Choking Restraints on your creature, you just sack it off to an Emerge cost. And you still get some value out of that lifeless creature that wasn't going anywhere. So Choking Restraints gives you an ability at instant speed. If you have 5 mana sitting around, you weren't doing anything else, you can pop it to get the creature off the board entirely.
Yeah, that's the way I see it as well. It's an early tempo play. There wouldn't be no question about is it playable if it's just, 2 and a white to keep it from attacking and blocking. It's it's an expensive pacifism. Still kind of a tempo play. The added ability is simply icing on the cake as far as limited goes, when removal is sometimes hard to find.
Right, so I think it'll have its uses to dump that 5 mana.
I'm also thinking of those cards that put you on the timer. There's the red, I can't remember what it is, the red one and the black one that flips and puts you on one life loss timers. This is unlimited with the current setup that is now. I've lost too many games with that. That's a perfect card for that.
You'll probably get to that mana that you can then utilize and get the full effect if you really need to exile something off of the board. I don't think the exile is going to come up too much, but I do think it's interesting that it's there. I think that's for the sealed players. Sealed players are going to be activating that. So a couple of cards that I think are going to be okay. Each color got a good piece of removal. That's nice to see. I'm very interested in Blue's Drag Under. 2 and a blue sorcery, return target creature to its owner's hand, draw a card. In games that go long, I think that's going to be fairly serviceable. I think people will like that. And red picked up some really good removal because red, unlike in Shadows, or as often, these red spells can go to the face. So you can play Incendiary Flow, 1 in a red uncommon sorcery. It deals 3 damage to target creature or player. Then if the creature would die, you exile it. So it's just a ton of upside there. It's sorcery speed, so that's its only drawback, but 2 mana, sure, I'll take that. So I think each of the colors got some removal. Green's the low end, but green usually is Prey Upon is back. So for the people who played an original Innistrad, you've got that conditional piece of removal back. Also, another card that seems like it's been printed before, Clear Shot, 2 and a green instant. Target creature you control gets +1/+1 till end of turn, and then deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. So it's got a guy holding a giant crossbow, and that makes sense. So you can usually craft a scenario in green where you can pick something off with that. But it is conditional. You do have to have a creature to be able to play it. So green's balance on power level. So because of the removal, there's enough removal by color out there. I think that games are going to go more towards the mid-game. As such, I think that there are a couple of mechanics that are going to be useful. I mean, Wizards rarely prints mechanics that can't be used. And I think that one of the fun mechanics to try to use is Emerge. So Emerge is an ability that is an alternate casting cost that you can, as you cast the spell, you can sacrifice a creature and send its converted mana cost to help pay for your Emerge cost. So one that I think that we will all be on board with and wanting to play is Wretched Griff. Cool art, going to look good in foil. 7 mana, you have an Eldrazi Hippogriff, which I'm on board with. It is 7 mana for a 3/4 flying. When you cast it, you draw a card. Not great. You'd probably pay it, but not great. But the Emerge cost is 5 and a blue. When you cast the spell, you can sacrifice a creature, and then pay the 5 and a blue prorated cost by using that creature's converted mana cost to reduce the spell. So if I had a creature that cost 3 and a blue and I sacrificed it, that's 4 converted mana cost, so I'd have to pay 1 and a blue, and I get my Wretched Hippogriff at 1 and a blue, and I get the card back from the creature that I lost. When you sacrifice creatures on your side of the board, that's usually bad. And like we brought up here, you can really get had when they kill your Emerge creature. But there are some good Emerge targets. So a couple of Emerge targets I found, and this was just in my review of the set, at the common and uncommon level, no good black or red Emerge targets. Nothing that I would want to throw into the graveyard. But looking at the Emerge costs, at least at the common and uncommon level, there aren't a lot of black or red Emerge costs. So that makes sense. In white, a good Emerge target is going to be Desperate Sentry. This particular card, I feel, is going to make the cut in most white decks. So it's 2 and a white for a 1/2, which when you look at that seems terrible. But when it dies, you get a 3/2 Eldrazi horror creature on the battlefield. And if you have Delirium, it gets +3/+0. So now you've got a 4/2 3-mana creature that when it dies, you get a 3/2 back. So I think that this particular card is a 2-for-1. You cast 1 creature, you get another one back. You get 2 creatures for the price of 1. You get a 1/2 and a 3/2. And if the power levels were reversed and it was a 3/2 for 3, that when it died you just got a 1/2, I think we'd all play that. That seems reasonable. Not great, but it's something. And I think that this is going to be one of those Emerge targets in white that you're going to want. Because not only is it a 2-for-1, but also a good Emerge target, I think that those are cards that are going to be a little more sought after in draft, that we're going to look at these cards that have multiple purposes to be able to use in different strategies. So there's another one, Enlightened Maniac, which is 3 and a blue for 0/2, which is terrible. But when it enters the battlefield, you get a 3/2. So this one I don't think is as good as an 0/2, but then it's 4 mana to sacrifice towards your Emerge if that's a strategy you want. And then the card next to it on the spoiler list is Exultant Cultist, 2 and a blue for a human wizard 2/2. When it dies, you draw a card. So 3 mana 2/2, underpowered but okay. Dies, you get your card back, which will matter in the late game. It can stack block, and you can sack it off to Emerge. So it's going to get you the 2-for-1, and it's going to get you some value for Emerge. So there are a couple of cards in green as well that do this. So I think identifying these targets and recognizing that, even if you don't have any emerge cards, all of those are 2-for-1s. They're going to get you ahead in the game. So I think that those are things that you should look for. What do you guys feel about, or if you guys want to speak to the power of a 2-for-1, especially in Limited? I know, Brenda, you played a lot of Limited, and people maybe who are newer or who haven't been in a situation to really use 2-for-1s or evaluate how good they are. What do you think about the concept of the 2-for-1 in Limited?
I think it's one of the most important things in Limited, simply because unlike Constructed, where you can pick and choose what your deck is built around, Limited, you really have to play with what resources you have available to you. Being able to get a 2-for-1 quite literally puts you ahead in the game, and being able to time that process properly can win or lose you a game. Getting 2-for-1 just sets you back, especially if it happens more than once, to a point that you quite often can't recover with the resources you have available to you. If you just think about Magic from a straight numbers standpoint, hopefully you start with 7 cards in your hand, and then if a game goes, say, 8 turns, you're only going to ever get 15 cards to play with. So if you have effectively made your 15 into 17 or 18 by getting very lucky and playing 2-for-1s, and your opponent therefore has dropped down in numbers, you can start seeing how that can really sway a game one way or another. So looking for ways to take advantage of that is super important.
So looking at 2-for-1s, I found a couple, and for those of you who are in the spoiler, you can scroll through with me. I'll try to make them alphabetical. But Desperate Sentry, that makes the 3-2 we've discussed. An uncommon in white, Extricator of Sin, 2 and a white for an 0-3, which sounds bad. When it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice another permanent. If you do, you get a 3-2 on the battlefield, and you get a card, you get the land in your graveyard for Delirium, which is convenient, because this card has a Delirium ability. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 4 more cards, you get to transform it, and your 2 and a white creature turns into a 3-5. That gives all of your Eldrazi's, including itself, because it is now an Eldrazi horror, and your 3-2, Vigilance, and you can pay to tap it, sack a non-Eldrazi creature, and get a 3-2 ostensibly with Vigilance because this is still on the board. So now you can begin upgrading your creatures, cast off creatures that aren't as good, create an army of Vigilance creatures. It just gives you extra versatility, and all you have to do is get Delirium on this particular card, which I feel was fairly easy to do using Shadows. There aren't quite as many enablers, but this just has the added bonus of when it comes into play, you can sacrifice another permanent, get a creature, and get something that you need into the graveyard.
So I want to interrupt you for a second there about talking about 2-for-1s. I think one of the things to watch out for is the trap 2-for-1s. So you talked about Extractor of Sin. That to me is an amazing 2-for-1. You can take away, you get a powerful creature, you sacrifice a permanent, and you get another powerful creature. Amazing 2-for-1. I think when you look at Desperate Sentry, that's in my opinion, a bad 2-for-1. A 1-2 for 3 mana is not something I want to pay. And then even when it dies, getting a 3-2 is also something I don't really want to be paying 3 mana for. So it's a 2-for-1, but it's not even a very good 2-for-1. To me, it's almost like a trap 2-for-1.
Yes, but it's one of those situations where you're purposely playing a bad card, maybe subjectively bad, because of the payoff later on, which is something I noticed, Jared. All those cards you said that were great setups for Emerge didn't cost less than 3 mana, because they were intended for Emerge. So paying the 3 mana up front to get 2 creatures, one which you're going to sack off, the other one which in Limited is not unreasonable for 3 mana in the first place, sets you up later as a mana investment. That's 3 mana you won't have to pay later.
All right, so there'll be definitely things to watch for, and I want to say, if I remember properly, Gary, you like to play blue, is that correct?
I'm a blue-green red guy. No, when I said not necessarily that combination, so.
Well, let's take a look at a blue 2-for-1 or even a 3-for-1. Scour the Laboratory. 4 blue instant, draw 3 cards. Now, not as good as Opportunity, which was same converted mana cost, draw 4 cards. This one lets you draw 3, but if you have Delirium, this costs 2 less. So now you're paying 2 blue to draw 3 cards. And that, I feel, is worth its value. Would you still pay a 4 blue, draw 3 cards? It depends on how late the game goes. If the game is going into the late game, then this card's great, because it's going to dig you 3 cards deep at the end of your turn. You're going to untap and have all your mana. But if you can manufacture Delirium, then this thing is really powerful. Drawing the 3 cards off of 4 mana, I bet we'd all like to do that.
Yeah, that's kind of good.
Right. Let me give an example of a card I don't think is good that's a 2-for-1 to talk to Matt's point about good and bad. Awesome art. Whispers of Emrakul. This is 1 and a black sorcery. Target opponent discards a card at random. Delirium. If you have Delirium, target opponent discards 2 cards at random instead. So this particular card without Delirium is a 1-for-1. And it's a little bit better than having your opponent get to pick the card, but you're not picking it. So you don't know what's going into the graveyard. Additionally, we've discovered with Delirium, sometimes milling your opponent or having your opponent discard cards helps them rather than hurts them. So, and of course, if they're discarding a card with Madness, they get value out of it. So while Whispers of Emrakul, if you had Delirium, could make your opponent discard 2 cards for you playing your 1 card, a 2-for-1, this is one, in the context of the set, with what's going on, I don't think is good. Because you can help your opponent rather than hurt them. And by the time you get Delirium, how many cards are they going to have in their hand? If your opponent has just the 1 card in hand, the 2-for-1 doesn't matter at that point. Now you're just 1-for-1ing.
It's one of those cards you have to have in your opening hand and play it earlier. It's not worth the value.
Well, no, I think it's more one of those cards that's really bad because of all the madness. So I think it's set specific. So in like a limited format, it would be worse. But I think it's one of those cards that was printed for a modern legacy, vintage possibly.
I think it's great in early turns when people are casting cards and you're on your turn and your opponent doesn't have the mana to enable the madness, and it's great. But unless you're running multiple copies, it's not worth the risk. I think I don't know. It's that risk versus reward.
Matt makes a great point here that I actually observed when I was looking over the spoilers as well. There's a lot in this set that seems geared towards Eternal formats. There's some in the set that's like, this is very obviously for standard, and then there's some of it that's like, this is a bomb for limited, this is a removal card for limited. So I wouldn't see it as far-fetched that this was intended for strategies such as 8-rack or other Eternal format strategies.
Is it going to make it into the Vintage Cube?
Sneak it in?
Sneak it in.
So a couple of other cards that I thought were noteworthy for 2-for-1s or ways to get extra value out of the card at just a single card that give you some versatility. In red, we have Smoldering Werewolf, which I think is a cool art and concept. 2 red for a werewolf horror. 3/2, that when it comes in the battlefield, it does 1 damage to each of up to 2 target creatures. So I think that this card is actually pretty good because in most of the red strategies, with the exception of the Oops Red Spells deck, you are going to be attacking, and sometimes you are going to be crashing into your opponent's board where they have some blocks. And this particular card doesn't say you have to play it in your first main phase. So you can attack into your opponent's 3/3 with your 2/2, and then play this in the second main phase, and do 1 damage to that creature and finish it off. So I think that there is some versatility if your opponent happened to have an X1 and then something else you want to finish, that you can get them with this card and get some extra value. And perhaps not a pure 2-for-1, this does give you an ability of 4 red transform it. And when you transform it, it turns into a 6/4 Eldrazi Werewolf, and when it attacks, it's now Erupting Dreadwolf. It deals 2 damage to target creature or player. So
Holy cow.
If you reach turn 6 and you have some extra mana, you can flip it. Or on turn 6, when you have your 6th mana, you can just cash it in immediately, turn it into a 6/4, attack, shock something, even if it's your opponent, and now you've got a 6/4. So definitely a way you can sink your mana. Mana sinks in towards later games, so mid-game, late-game strategies. Having this guy sitting around is going to be nice because if you start to flood out, you have something you can do with it. Yeah, it does have to be attacking. Yeah, it's going to get double-teamed and died. But if you played the Smoldering Wolf and one of the 2 damage it did when it came down kills something, you attack with it once. They block or take damage either way. It survives, and then you get to transform it. You attack. You shock something on their side of the field. So if they've got 2 4/4s, you shock a 4/4. Or you shock, if they have 2 3/3s, you can shock the opponent. It's a 6/4, so they're going to want to double block to kill it. and then you kill 2 of their creatures with your 1 creature, you've shocked your opponent, and you finished off 1 of their X1. That's a lot of value out of 1 card, stacked out over the course of a game, in a not too far-fetched scenario. So I think that that's going to be a card that's a kind of an example of getting extra value and getting a 2-for-1 by manufacturing some board states, which means you have to understand the game tempo that you're operating in. So, and then of course there's other cards that are just pure 2-for-1s, such as like Spreading Flames. 6 in a red instant, deal 6 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures. Not players, unfortunately, but you're probably going to get 2 creatures for the price of 1 there.
So the question is, you brought up that 7 drop. Are we going to get to 7 to actually take advantage of dealing 6 to multiple creatures?
That's interesting. In red, I don't think so, because a lot of the red cards still lend themselves towards aggression. But I think that it's worth noting. So, noting aggression to determine the full pace of a format, I went and I looked at some cards that I would consider purely offensive. Cards that I felt just really worked in an offensive strategy. It turns out I didn't really see much in blue, surprise, surprise, or black. A few in green, but red and white, I think, had the most aggressive strategies. So let's stay in red, since we're on that part of the spoiler, and let's scroll down a little bit to Vilden Pack Outcast. Werewolf Horror for 4 and a red. It's a 4/4 trample for 4 and a red. That's pretty good. I'll take that. We played the 4/5 Arsonists that had the Menace ability, I believe. So, and that was okay. 4/4 trample, that's okay. You can pay a red, and it gets +1, -1 until end of turn. So, ostensibly the next turn, you can attack with it, you can pay red, 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 turn it into a 7/1 trample and get some damage in and kill something in the process if you need to. Or, if you have 7 mana sitting around, that magical number of 7, you can transform it, and it turns into a 5/7 trample that has fire breathing. Pay 1, and it gets +1/+0. So that creature is way out of control. Because if you transform this thing at the end of turn, you have 7 mana down, you can untap and then tap all 7 of your mana and turn this into a 12/7. Although I feel that's a flavor fell, you need to play your 8th land to make it a 13/7 trample. So I think that a card like this, I think, lends itself to aggression, because if you started off aggressively, this particular card can just really close the game out. Other card in red that I think does a good job at maintaining an aggressive perspective and keeps you wanting to keep going is Abandon Reason. 2 in a red for an instant. Up to 2 target creatures get +1/+0 and first strike until end of turn, and you can Madness this card. So you can set up some scenarios with the Madness mechanic to where you can get your opponent to declare blockers and then trot this thing out for 2 mana. If you had the Heir of Falkenrath and you flipped it over and you got this down, you could eat 2 of your opponent's creatures and just really get ahead on cards by playing that. So I think a card like this lends itself to aggression if you wanted to be in an aggressive deck. But I think white is where we see some of the best aggressive cards. I think if your opponent turn 1 planes, I think that may tell you a little bit more about the game than any other turn 1 land play, because there are some really good cards. One of the cards that I liked quite a bit in white as an aggressive version strategy, let me scroll through to find it. There are quite a few good common creatures. Most of the white common creatures are all playable. Drogskull Shieldmate. 2 in a white for a 2/3 flash. When it enters the battlefield, other creatures you control get +0/+1 until end of turn. That particular card is great at setting up an awesome attacking block scenario where your opponent feels they've done the combat math. They're going to trade their 3/2s with your 2/3s, and then suddenly you make all of your 2/3s 2/4s. And it tampers with the math, and it lets your creatures just really blow them out and keep pressure on your opponent because they're down cards.
I just want to say it is the absolute best, at least to me, when your opponent is convinced of the combat math, moves on to damage and says, okay, so these trade and these trade and these trade, and you say, no, hold on, wait.
Or Lone Rider, 1 in a white for a 1/1 first strike lifelink human knight. At the beginning of the end step, if you gained 3 life, that's a tall order and is going to take a combat trick. You can transform him, but boy, if you do. So for what does your 2 mana buy you? Your 2 mana Lone Rider turns into It That Rides as 1, where the human and the horse have melded together in some really twisted, awesome art where the horse has all these legs. and it is a 4/4 first strike trample lifelink creature. It's hard to lose a game with a creature like that. Yeah, and there are some pump spells that aren't terrible that you can slap onto this guy to get him to flip over. But I don't think that it asks a lot of you as a 1/1 first strike lifelink for 2. It's not going to ask a lot. If you have a couple of good targets that you can play, or there are cards that are in the set that are aggressive, that pump your team when they play, like a Borrowed Grace, which is the Escalate card, which we haven't talked a lot about, but Escalate, I also believe, leads to longer games. It has a cost, and then you can pay the Escalate cost to get additional modes. Remember, when you play a modal spell, you'll choose all of the modes you want, but they happen in order that they are printed on the card. So Borrowed Grace is 2 and a white that says choose one or both. If you choose both, you have to pay 3 white. Creatures you control get +2/+0, or creatures you control get +0/+2. So both an offensive and a defensive spell. I wouldn't play this in every deck, but in an aggressive deck, yeah, I'll pump my team for 3 mana. And it just happens that this guy happens to flip over, and the first strike keeps him alive. So I think that there are some strategies with white that lend towards a little more aggression than perhaps we've seen. And knowing that, just because you have an aggressive deck does not mean that you have to win by turn 4. There's a difference between an aggressive deck and a deck that's just all-in suicide damage. Aggressive decks keep pressure on your opponent over time by manufacturing a board state in which you are the attacker and they are the defender. And there are some cards that help that board state along that cost a lot of mana. And that's okay. Everything doesn't have to be Goblin Guide in a limited aggressive deck. So the last card I'll point to in white is Subjugator Angel. 4 white for a 4/3 flyer. That's okay. But when it enters the battlefield, you tap all of the creatures your opponents control. All of them. So your whole team gets in. And if you've been aggressive and you have your opponent at 14, let's say, and then you play this and tap their team down and put your opponent to 6, and you have a 4/3 flyer on your side of the board, that game's probably over, unless they have something miraculous.
It's definitely something to play in an aggressive deck. I see that as a trap card if you are thinking, well, I'm going to play for the long game, and then I'm going to play that and tap all the creatures so they can't attack. There's a sort of a missing link of logic there, the idea that if they're already tapped, you can't really do much to them. So definitely, as you said, something for the aggressive decks.
I do think that it also works great for control type matchups where, and I don't mean control in the sense of you're playing counter spells and removal spells, but control in the sense of you're just grinding up the board, making it sticky. Your creatures have more toughness than their attack power, and they can't get a profitable attack on. If you drop that down, even your mediocre creatures can just get in there for an alpha swing, and the game will be over so fast that a not air quotes aggressive deck can just end the game.
And this particular card is worded in an interesting way. When Subjugator Angel enters the battlefield, tap all creatures your opponents control. So in Commander, that taps the field, and Two-Headed Giant, that taps the field. So you'll get some added value for that, so pick up your Subjugator Angel foils. I think that card may pop up in Angel in Kalia Commander. What do you guys think?
Oh, I agree with that, definitely. I think it's a powerhouse in Commander.
I don't do foils.
So the last thing I always like to look at, and it's more of the humor thing for me. I know we're going a little bit long, but I always like to look at junkers. Cards that I just can't see myself playing, cards that I think are just awful, for limited at least. Have you guys had a chance to look? Have you picked any favorite cards you just can't stand or that you're never going to play?
Oh, always.
Do any of you guys have a card in mind that you'd like to look at or showcase for cards that are going to be the last pack that you're just never going to play?
Give yours, and I'm going to look over the list and come up with mine. I'm sure everyone else will do the same.
Sure. I've got a couple that I think are real good. One of them is Turnicide. 1 blue for an instant counter target spell that targets a permanent you control is so situational and just so not playable, because for the time that it comes up, just having a 2/2 in your hand would have been better than that, almost always.
So this is a reprint card from, is it Mirrodin? The Mirrodin block?
We will find out in a moment. I will look that up for us. I want to say Scars.
Okay, Scar. Yeah, I think maybe Scars of Mirrodin. So, since it's a reprint, how was it played back then? Was it unplayably bad back then, and we think it's just going to be also bad now? Was it played in limited sometimes, and we just think it'll be bad now? Like, how does it compare to past formats?
Yeah, is there a preconceived idea that it's bad already because it was released before?
This particular card, when it was played before, was not played widely at all that I remember, because what this card is a 1-for-1. This card negates one thing your opponent is doing, either to one of your creatures or to you. So it saves you some damage, keeps you from discarding a card, keeps you from sacking a creature, or ostensibly saves one of your creatures from blowout damage or something like that, or a kill spell. Which means, for this card to be good, you have to have something worth saving, or be it 2 life, and have this card in your hand, and your opponent has to have the card in their hand that causes you a problem, and the mana to play it, plays it, and you have the mana up to play this to counter it. This card does not advance your board state. It doesn't put you in any better position on board. It does not help you win the game. When you are way behind, this card is garbage. When you are way ahead, this card is garbage. So at parity, this card could be okay, but it doesn't advance you in any way. So instead of looking at this card like, this will save my best creature, well, chances are your best creature is not going to be the one on the board. This will just save one of your creatures. Just play another creature. It's better.
That's a good point.
Yeah, no, I wasn't trying to argue that the card was good. I was just asking how was it played before?
Right. This particular card got skipped over. It just wasn't relevant enough to ever get a slot. So there's one more really bad card that I had seen, or a card that I thought was not very good. I always like to look at them to see what they're doing. Oh, Emrakul's Influence. 2 green enchantment. Whenever you cast an Eldrazi creature spell with a converted mana cost of 7 or greater, you draw 2 cards.
Garbage and limited garbage.
Yeah, if anybody draws 4 cards off of this, please send a screenshot and let me know how that went out, because I don't want to spend my whole turn 4 doing stone cold nothing. Not even playing a card that I can emerge one of my big Eldrazi creatures into. Just stone cold nothing. So what about you guys? Have you guys found any cards there that you thought were particularly bad, or that you just can't see yourself playing?
Well, I know there's a card that people have called bad, Lunar Force. It is for 2 and a blue, an enchantment that sits on the battlefield, and basically when your opponent casts the next spell, sacrifice it and counter that spell. I think that card is playable. I think it's scary. I think your opponent, especially if you're playing on curve where you play this on turn 3, they're 4-drop, they're not going to want to play anymore. Chances are they'll play a 2-drop instead. And so the tempo advantage that you gain from a card like that, an enchantment where they have to play around the counter spell, it causes your opponent to play a new form of Magic where they are beating themselves.
It's ultimate control and tempo, anti-tempo at the same time.
Well, no, it's more they're playing against their own...
Well, yeah, but you're forcing it on them, so that's why I think it's awesome.
So I don't think it's unplayable, but I don't think it's playable. So let me explain. The issue with this card is, yes, you are completely correct. By playing it, you throw them off tempo. They're not going to play their 4-drop. However, and this is the thing that I don't like about the card, and I think this is a lens that you really need to view all Magic cards through, is that this is giving the choice to your opponent. So they're going to get a spell countered. Whenever that happens in Magic, I want to be in control of the spell I counter. In this case, they see it, and they can throw their yucky 2/2 out, and it's okay. But their 4/4 is still going to come, and you're still in trouble, even if it's a turn later. Whereas if this was, a cancel, I could cancel the 4/4 if I really needed to. And I think in a case where in blue, most of the time wants to play the control game where I choose what I'm controlling of your deck, this is putting the choice back in my opponent's hand, and I never want my opponent to have the choice of what my cards do.
And I would agree with you if it wasn't for the fact that they have to spend the mana to cast a spell they know is getting countered. And I think it's going to be a time walk effect built into itself, because in limited Magic, your opponent's not casting 3 or 4 spells a turn. They're casting 1 spell a turn, maybe at most. Even if it's a 2-drop on turn 4, they're only going to cast one of them, and it's getting countered. and they have to spend the mana. They have to spend those resources to do it, and it also powers your delirium because it's now putting an enchantment into the graveyard.
It does put an enchantment in your graveyard, but I don't know if that's where you want to be to get the delirium out. Joseph, did you have a thought? Before I give my thought on this, Joseph, what was your thought on this card?
Well, I agree with what everyone's saying. It's a deterrent, but it also puts the decision in the hands of your opponent. So it really depends on who you're playing against and how you do it, and if you have a good poker face, which I do. So it really is one of those it depends kinds of cards. I've heard people say when you put the decision in your opponent's hands, then there's a chance they'll make the wrong decision, but you can't ever play with that assumption. So what I really don't like about it is the lack of a may clause.
And so how do you beat this card for the people who are scared that this will come down against you? Here's what you do. You just play into it and have one of your spells countered. There was a card. Yeah, there's a card way back in Odyssey called Standstill. 1 in a blue enchantment, and it just sits there. But whenever a player plays a spell, which is any player, you have to sacrifice it. If you do, each of their opponents draws 3 cards. The deck that this card is in gives the person who plays the Standstill lots of on-board options to where they don't have to play spells to get ahead. Most of your opponent's decks aren't that way. So while you never want to give your opponent 3 cards, that's what's going to happen here. You just play into it, give them their 3 cards, and go about your game plan with your opponent 3 cards up. Not the end of the game. What if they drew all lands? So with Lunar Force, if your opponent is on the play and they turn 3 Lunar Force you, and you have a land and you were going to play your 3-drop, well, you're just going to need to play that 3-drop and get this thing off the board so your 4-drop comes down. But if you happen to have a 1-drop or a 2-drop, that's just not very good. That is worse than your 3-drop. Yeah, throw something insignificant in front of it and get this thing off the board. But don't just let it sit there. I feel it is worse to untap your mana and then pass the turn knowing that you could have done something this turn or next turn and just do nothing in the face of this card. Because if you have a way to get this thing off the board, like if you have a hand that has 2 playable spells in it with the mana that you have, but you don't play either of those spells and you just sit there, now the Lunar Force says 2 in a blue, whenever an opponent casts a spell, sacrifice Lunar Force and counter that spell, your opponent skips their next turn. That's a really good card.
Having that turn
Don't give your opponent that card.
A silence every turn. That it would mean that if you know that your opponents will fall for this trick, then just play werewolves with that card. And now you're flipping your werewolves, or they have to counter the next spell. You're playing against the right people. That's a killer strategy.
Right. So this particular card I don't feel is good. I don't like my opponent getting choices when I could make all of the choices myself. But will this card make its way into decks? It probably will, but I would not, if I was the listener, I would not fear this card. Just understand that you're going to get something countered. That happens in Magic. Sometimes you discard cards, sometimes you mill bombs, sometimes they have removal. Like, that's part of the game.
Okay, so I have an answer for you, Jared, as far as trap cards that I'm just never really going for. There are a lot of auras in this set that don't do enough or just beg for a 2-for-1 when I'd rather just have the creature already be able to do the thing. You already talked about Prophetic Ravings, and that's one of the ones I'm thinking about. It's just sort of, oh yeah, you can get it so you can get some madness stuff and filter through your deck, but it's just, I'm begging for a 2-for-1 at some point. It'd be better just to play Heir of Falconwrath and just discard the card off of her, and things like that. And there's quite a few auras like that are just begging for a 2-for-1, so that's my answer.
Prophetic Ravings is red for an aura. Enchanted creature has haste. Who cares? And tap, discard a card to draw a card. So you have to now lose access to whatever that creature was, ability to attack or block, just so you can try to set up this convoluted board state of all of this means too much work.
With that, we'll move into the community question. So all of you listening, if you were listening through YouTube or through manalink.com, then you can answer us there. If you're on iTunes, come find us at manalink.com/mtguk/author/draw-4-podcast. And I wanted to know, what Magic the Gathering cards or strategies are you most excited for at the Eldritch Moon pre-release? I'm going to let Matt and Gary answer first.
I'm all about that big furry monster, those 2 cards coming together. I like to do stuff on the whim, so I don't really even go that in-depth as far as studying cards. I like to just kind of see how it comes when the packs are drafted, because to me, overlooking and kind of I enjoy the reviews. Don't get me wrong. It's just that sometimes it doesn't match up with the reality of what you actually get out of the pack. So I just like living in the moment. Matt has a whole different take than I do.
Can I admit something? I personally don't like sealed. So, pre-releases are fun because we've never played with these cards before, but I'm excited for the pre-release because that means draft is soon.
For me, I'm excited to play Grizzled Angler. 2 and a blue human for a 2/3. You tap, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. If there's a colorless creature in your graveyard, you flip it into a 4/5 Eldrazi fish, because I want an Eldrazi fish on my side of the board. Other than that, I'm excited to get away from clues. I think that the ongoing investigation was just such a difficult card to beat that there were just some strategies that, if crafted, just became really difficult. And I think that there's a lot more zombies in this particular set, so some of the zombie strategies are a little more viable. Can't tell you how many times I opened the Zombie Lord guide and had no zombies to put with it, and it didn't even make the cut. So I think that there's going to be some interesting mechanics, and I like mid to late game strategies. So I'm excited to get to play games that are competitive into turn 9 and 10 and leverage my play skill over a longer period of time.
For me, I'm as odd as it is to say, I'm super excited that Murder is back. I'm excited to play with that again in a limited environment. From a competitive standpoint, I really hope that I get to open Thalia and or a sweet like white-green humans type deck. I think that's going to be super powerful in sealed and even more so in draft. I'm a limited junkie. Like, if you put packs in for me, I will be super excited to crack them and let's play. I don't care what kind of format it is. So with the themes we have in this one and the different synergies, I think this is going to be super exciting to see how the cards play together and see what we can come with them. So I can't wait for this weekend.
Just like last time, I was excited about a lot of the sweet removal. There was Murderous Compulsion, and now we've got Murder to throw in the list. What I like to do is black removal with green fatties. This time around, I just want in Sealed to have 2 cards that actually meld together so I can meld over and flip to a huge big creature and ask for a 2-for-1. That's all I want to do in this pre-release. If that happens, I'm happy. Matt and Gary, thanks for joining us. You guys from over in Afghanistan at BAFDraft. Where can we find BAFDraft again? I forgot. Maybe it was BAFDraft.net, BAFDraft.org. What is it?
It's BAFDraft.com, or you can find us. We have a Facebook group as well, facebook.com/groups/BAFDraft, and
we also have a Twitter feed at _BAFDraft for our Facebook group and for our Twitter feed. We, even if you're not deployed, we still have some of our people who were deployed. They still comment and actively are members.
Yeah, Jared's on there.
Yeah,
so.
even from back in the States. So we have all kinds of different people.
Brenda, what is your unique Twitter handle?
You can find me anywhere online at Brenda is Bored.
That's on Twitter, that's on Twitch, and all kinds of other places. You're going to be streaming stuff, aren't you?
Yeah, I was on vacation in London, so not so streamy, and then now once again, whenever it seems we record, I seem to get a cold, so I'm going to start blaming you.
It's not, no, I didn't do it. I'm sorry. It was England this time.
Actually, it really was. So once I finally kick this and I don't sound completely stuffed up, the plan is to start streaming again. So yeah, you can find me on Twitch, Twitter. I'm also going to start uploading videos to YouTube, Facebook, email. Seriously, Brenda is Bored. I'm there. Find me.
All right. You can find Jared on Facebook. Look for The Gathering Place Abilene, and that's where you can find Jared. He's the guy who sends the product out for BAFDraft. And I'm Joseph Dunlap. You can find me on my author page at manolink.com/mtguk/author/Joseph-Dunlap. You can find me on Twitter, Joseph_Dunlap. Look for us at 10 Minute Magic, this little project. We are experiencing an influx of listeners there as well. This has been Draw 4 Podcast. Until next time, enjoy your pre-release. We wish you good fortune, and may you draw well.